Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session of Research Live. Today is Thursday, January 23rd in the year 2025. I'm Mike Terrazas, Director of Research Communications here at UGA. I hope everyone enjoyed the snow day yesterday. We're glad you could be with us to learn more today about how faculty and students who work in laboratory settings can make their work more environmentally friendly in a session titled Sustainability and the Scientific Process: Walking the Walk in University Research. So before I hand it over to our speakers, let me just mention a few quick words of housekeeping. We will take questions and comments following the presentation. You can participate either through the Q&A or the raise hand functions, both of which you'll see along the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you use the raise hand function, I'm going to assume that you want to ask your question by voice. So I'll call on you by name and I'll enable your microphone while you ask your question. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let me introduce our speakers today. We have Star Scott, who is manager and founder of UGA Sustainable Science and Green Labs. And we have Mark Hunter, who is the Dean and Eugene P. Odom Professor in the Odom School of Ecology. So Mark, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Michael, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to engage in a conversation with you about sustainability and the scientific process. I do want to start with one big caveat, which is we are not in any way trying to influence the amount of research that anybody does or the kinds of research that anybody does. The research enterprise is incredibly important to the University of Georgia and the world as a whole. All we're really hoping for today is to begin a conversation in which we start to look intentionally at the process of doing science and find leverage points for doing that science more sustainably. Next slide, please, Star. Next slide, thanks. So the goals really for today are straightforward. First of all, as I say, to continue an ongoing campus conversation on sustainable science. You may already have heard from your postdocs, your graduate students, your colleagues that they're interested in this, and that's one of the things we want to talk about today. And then introduce the Green Lab program to consider some of the actions that we might all be able to take here at the University of Georgia, and invite you to participate in developing and perhaps implementing your own ideas for sustainability in your research lab that fit your needs with that sustainability mindset. And last point here, then serve as ambassadors for sustainable science at UGA and beyond in conversations with colleagues within and beyond the university. Next slide. So just so that we're all on the same page, sustainability means an awful lot of things to an awful lot of people. It's used a lot. I try and keep things very simple. So for me, I love this definition. It seems to be very easy to use. So an action is sustainable if it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. And I think that's a really easy way to reflect on the actions that we're taking and decide whether or not what we're doing is or is not sustainable. Next. And in doing that, we tend to focus on three aspects of sustainability: an environmental aspect, a social aspect, and an economic aspect. Next slide. So what does this mean for sustainable research? As I said before, we need a robust research enterprise at UGA. Of course, we need it nationally and internationally as well. Next. And that's important for innovation, for human health and well-being, for economic development. It's also important for fields including art and music, where research might take a different form, but it's critical to that aspect of human endeavor as well. And the key really is to recognize, to be intentional and to recognize and mitigate where possible the unintended consequences of what we do as researchers. Again, within that framework of environmental, social, and economic sustainability. Next. So rather than point the finger at anybody else and say who's doing what badly, I thought I'd point the finger directly at myself and let you know about my own lack of sustainable footprint in my research career. So before I took on the role I have today, I spent 25 years studying the chemistry of plants and how that chemistry influences animals, microbes, ecosystems, and even the transmission of disease. And I think, my motivations were probably much like many of yours. I was interested in contributing to theory, to conservation in my case, also maybe in a bit of drug discovery, and of course training and mentoring the next generation of scientists, all things I think which are strong motivations. And boy, did we ever have fun doing it. It was quite a large group of folks over the years. We did some international field work. We did a lot of field work within the US. We did greenhouse work, we did laboratory work, and just about everything you could imagine in between. And it got to be quite a large group. So we were processing a lot of plant samples each year. Next slide, please. So what were the unintended consequences of that work? So a quick back of the envelope calculation I did last week suggests that we were using about 97,000 plastic pipette tips each year, and at least 2 million over the lifetime of my research lab. We went through thousands of gallons of solvents to extract plant samples and to do the kind of chemical analyses that we were doing. Next. Of course, we did national, international travel to field sites, to conferences, to meetings. That won't be of any surprise. Freezers, enormous drain of power. We used a lot of freezer capacity, incubators, growth rooms for doing assays with animals. Next slide. Incalculable number of sample tubes. I can't remember how many tubes we used per individual plant sample, but it probably was 10 tubes per sample, and we collected hundreds of thousands of samples. And then miscellaneous lab supplies. It's possible to calculate all of those. It's actually fairly straightforward to sit down and try and work out what those numbers might be. But there are unintended consequences that are much harder to measure. I just want to talk about a few of those briefly. So there might be implications for environmental justice, the sort of social pillar of sustainability. So for example, using plastics from the petrochemical industry, the location of those petrochemical plants are not always equitably distributed. In fact, they rarely are across society. Next. There might also be issues of economic inequity. In other words, where do my samples come from? Who's making them and how much are they being paid? And Star Scott is going to talk a little bit, give you a direct example of that in just a little while. Last is the ownership. Who owns the rights? For example, as somebody who's studying plants and plant chemistry for drug discovery, who owns the rights of the chemical structures that we might have isolated? Next. So it was a huge amount of fun to travel around Africa, watching elephants that were unwell and trying to work out what they were feeding on to make themselves feel better. But if I isolate a compound from a plant used medicinally by an elephant in Africa, who owns the rights to that information? Who owns the rights to any economic advantage that comes from it? These are kind of the unintended consequences of what we do. Next. Not trying to depress you. So let's exhale for a second. Remind ourselves that conducting this kind of research is absolutely essential for what we want to do. Next. Many of the consequences might be unavoidable and perhaps worth the cost of doing business. Next. But it might be possible to mitigate or eliminate other impacts if we're mindful and intentional about what we do. I think the key point from this part is for us to be aware, for us to be proactive. Next. And so I'm going to introduce Star Scott, who's going to show us how to begin implementing sustainable practices in our own lab work. As Michael said, Star is the founder and manager of Sustainable Science and the Green Labs Initiative at the University of Georgia. She is a bulldog, having got her undergraduate degree in wildlife science from the University of Georgia, but also a certificate in the circular economy and sustainable strategies from the Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. She started working at the University of Georgia at least as far back as 2002, and other than a couple of years out as a farm manager, has really worked at UGA from 2002 up until the present day, joining FMD to run the Green Labs program in 2016. She publishes and presents regularly on Green Lab practices and serves on the board of directors of the International Institute for Sustainable Laboratories. Star, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dean Hunter, for partnering with us on this webinar. And thanks to Michael Terrazas and his team for having us today. So, as Dean Hunter indicated, science makes so many incredible contributions to this planet. But for a long time, the scientific enterprise, we've operated as though our positive contributions exempt us from the need to mitigate our environmental and social impacts. But science does have a carbon footprint, as well as many other environmental and social impacts, many of which are contributing to the exact problems that we are all working so hard to solve. So it's quite paradoxical, really. And it's well documented, of course, that emissions and pollution from operations are contributing cause to environmental and social problems. And science, unfortunately, is a part of that. So my presentation today is going to start with a snapshot of where we're at with the overall scientific enterprise. And then we'll talk about what you can do in your labs to make them more sustainable. And then we'll have a discussion at the end, hopefully. Hopefully you won't be shy. And we'll answer any questions you have about how you can get started. So when we start looking at labs and defining this impact, we have to start at the building level. So there's a lot of aspects of high-tech research facilities and research labs that have environmental and social impacts. So buildings generate nearly 40% of annual global CO2 emissions, and the built environment is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than any other sector of the economy, including transportation, agriculture, and industry. Building operations themselves are responsible for 28% of total global annual CO2 emissions. So that's really what's happening at the building level. And when we look inside the lab, at the lab level, the average research lab is consuming 10 to 15 times the resources of an office or a classroom per square foot and generates an estimated 25 times the waste or more, depending on your research. So research labs are extremely resource intensive spaces. And in most major research institutions, including UGA, labs account for about 20 to 30% of total building space, but use between 40 and 60% of our total campus building energy use. So very intensive spaces. If you look at this piece of equipment on the top right of your screen, the autoclave, we use this for sterilization in our research. I'm sure many of you use this. This one piece of equipment uses the same amount of water that's used by 4.5 American households annually. And that's if it's functioning properly. If it's not, it can waste up to 2.6 million gallons of water a year, just that one piece of equipment. We have quite a few on campus. This chemical fume hood on the bottom right of your screen, of course, is a great engineering control to keep harmful vapors out of your breathing zone. But in a single year, it uses the same amount of energy as 3.5 American households. And we have close to 1,200 of them on campus. So our in-lab equipment itself has a massive impact. Now, if we look at waste streams, we're looking downstream, what's leaving our labs. We generate a lot of waste in research. So most R1 research institutions, including UGA, we create about 100,000 pounds of EPA RCRA hazardous waste a year. We also use a ton of plastics. And of course, everything that's coming into our labs, most of it is also wrapped in plastic film as well. So how much plastic are we using as far as single-use plastics? Urbina et al. Estimated in Nature in 2015 that we were using about 5.5 million metric tons of plastic waste annually. That was equivalent to the mass of 67 cruise ships, just to try and kind of conceptualize that. But that number is likely much higher as our use of single-use plastics has exponentially grown over the last decade. And also that study didn't include biopharma. But many of these waste streams that you'll see on this slide, we're not even the users of. So the styrofoam coolers and ice packs that come into our labs, the scientific distributors are the users of those products. And yet we're left to mitigate and manage those materials. Now, for those of you who are doing computational work, The environmental costs of computer cloud storage and data centers are huge and continuing to rise. So a single data center uses the same amount of energy as 50,000 American homes. And the entire cloud has a greater carbon footprint than the entire airline industry. It's also a worthy mention that a single chat GPT conversation uses about 500 milliliters of water, equivalent to, one plastic bottle of water. So we need to remember that these electronic actions also have environmental and social impacts. Now, this is a study, the carbon impact of biotech and pharma, that was conducted by a nonprofit, My Green Lab. And they had four key findings that came out of this study. The first was that the majority of science, at least in private sector, do not have climate commitments. The second was that global biotech and pharmaceutical industry have a significant footprint. It was estimated at 197 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually. And then they found that scope 3 emissions are nearly 5 times higher than scope 1 and 2 combined. So it's mind blowing, right? So that was really the target. That's kind of the low hanging fruit. We can look at supply chain, those scope 3 emissions, purchased goods and services. Those are really providing an incredible opportunity for mitigation. Now, this graphic echoes what the carbon impact study just said. And this from the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, and shows that 90% of an organization's greenhouse gas emissions are embedded in their supply chain. So um, everything we were talking about before in terms of resource conservation, that was all um, above that iceberg. And what was happening under that iceberg is really all the supply chain. So we have to really be looking at that scientific procurement and purchasing. And that, y'all, is the very quick overview of the impact of where we're at right now with the global research enterprise, and kind of establishing that why. Why do we even need this program? But I also want to share with you the framing that we use within UGA Sustainable Science and Green Labs program. And I want to start here with this concept of interconnectedness. Now, interconnectedness is a founding principle of ecology, but interestingly, it also applies to our scientific processes and operations. So every piece of equipment that comes into our lab, or every consumable that comes into our lab, it has a story. It has a story of how it impacted a community or an ecosystem somewhere. And every piece of waste that leaves our labs also has a story. There is no away. So when we throw something away, we have to remember it goes somewhere and it impacts a community or environment. And we have to remember that as scientists and as a research institution, we carry almost all of the benefit of our scientific processes and very, very little of the burden. So we've got to look a little deeper. We got to think a little broader about our operations, about our processes. And this is really the core value and is at the heart of the UGA Green Labs program. So if you get only one thing from this presentation today, I hope that you're encouraged to expand the way you're thinking about your own research, your own practices, to think a little bit further along that value chain, a little bit further upstream, a little bit further downstream, to include a broader considerations of your research. So this is the invitation. It's a new vision for science and what it means to do good science. So we know that historically this has always been about rigor and reproducibility, hopefully bringing in adequate funding. But we want to make the argument that to do good science also means to be sustainable and as efficient as possible in your own operations. So of course, UGA, we know we're the oldest public higher ed institution in the country. But we have this amazing opportunity in front of us to champion sustainable science and to really be leaders in this capacity. We are leaders in a lot of ways, and I hope that we can also be leaders in this capacity. So to share with you a little bit about our program, excuse me one moment. UGA Green Labs is here to serve UGA's research community. So most of us in research are highly focused on our subject matter, and we may not have the time or the bandwidth to research every facet of our operations, whether that's equipment or consumables, or even methods or processes. And that's where the Sustainable Science and Green Labs program comes in. We can provide you with data about operations or equipment or consumables to help guide you in this capacity. So our program is broken up into 3 categories. We have this upstream category of procurement and supply chain. We have this in-lab category that really looks at resource conservation, waste diversion, equity, things happening within the 4 walls of your lab. And then downstream, which is waste management, end-of-life equipment, asset management, those types of things. So today I just want to share with you 10 actions that you can take towards a more sustainable lab. I'm going to give you 5 actions you can take over the next week, starting as soon as you get off of this webinar, 3 actions you can take over the next 2 months, and 2 actions you can take over the coming year. So to jump right in, number 1, make sustainability a core value of your research. So if you are moved by the why that we've shared here today, then just make a decision. Decide that you are going to integrate sustainable practices into your science. And that can look like many things. Maybe that's incorporating sustainability discussions into your lab meetings. Certainly, it's about getting the rest of your team on board and having a shared collective understanding of why this matters and is important. And a few actions you can take to start doing that is by exploring the UGA Green Labs website and see what we have to offer. But also exploring the I2SL site. That's the International Institute for Sustainable Laboratories. Now, we have an institutional membership to I2SL, which means everyone on this call is a member of I2SL. And so if you want any sort of exclusive member access, just reach out to us. We're happy to share that information with you. And also there's I2SL also offers an online circular economy of labs community of practice that's free and open to all, that has an incredible amount of information in there as well. All right, number 2 in the 5 actions that you can take over the next week. Raise your ultra low freezer set point to -70. Now, these are some of the most massive consumers of energy we have in research labs. Many of these units can use the same amount of energy in a single day as an American household, a 2,000 square foot home. And raising the temperature from -80 to -70 actually can result in 30% energy savings. So that 10 degrees is really a big push for that unit as far as how much energy it needs to cool. And then interestingly, most samples don't scientifically require -80 storage. So there was actually never a scientific need for colder sample storage. The refrigeration industry made the change when they figured out better technology on how to make a colder freezer. So many of most of our sample storage is actually not scientifically required as far as the temperature goes. But just raising this 10 degrees reduces the burden on the compressors of your unit. It reduces the heat load coming off your unit, which means that the building HVAC doesn't have to work as hard. So this is energy savings on multiple levels that you see by just taking this one action. And it prolongs the life of your unit, which is a really big deal because y'all know these units cost around $17,000. But it takes about 2 minutes to do. If you're not sure how to do it, just reach out to us. We're happy to come help you. And then we can also share a database with you demonstrating the efficacy of higher temperatures for different types of sample storage. We realize that the samples in these units represent sometimes years of your life. And we don't want you to make any decisions you're not comfortable with. So let us help you make data-driven decisions to put your mind at ease and make sustainable changes with confidence. All right, number 3, another action you can take over this coming week, shut the fume hood sash when it's not in use. Now, if you walk around any lab building on campus, you're gonna see a lot of fume hoods that are unoccupied that have this sash up. And just by shutting that sash and getting in the habit of shutting that sash, you're going to save up to 40% the energy for variable air volume systems. These fume hoods, again, use the same amount of energy as 3.5 American households. And this is like having the AC on and the windows open, right? So remember, this is all conditioned air that's being sucked out those stacks in the top of the building. So it had to be heated or cooled and dehumidified, really energy intensive processes to get that conditioned air. And like most things in Green Labs, this is really about lasting behavior modification. So, whenever we start a habit, it takes a little more energy at the beginning, but then once you have it, it takes very little energy to engage in that practice. All right. The number 4 action you can take over the next week is sign up for the International Laboratory Freezer Challenge. Now, if you're not aware of this challenge, it's a global competition to promote best practices in cold storage management in laboratories. So this challenge will help save energy, but it also helps protect your samples and it helps protect your equipment. So it's really a win-win for both the institution, for the planet, and for your science. I was in a lab for nearly a decade and didn't know that we were supposed to be conducting preventative maintenance on these units. So most researchers don't know this. And so if you will scan this QR code or you'll go to our website, you can sign up for a consult. We come out to your lab. Depending on your number of freezers, it takes about 20 minutes, but we'll show you how to conduct preventative maintenance. We'll bring you a free freezer defrost kit and some other, like a maintenance log and some other tools you can use. And maybe the best part, the most exciting part, is that the winner of the challenge will win a brand new high efficiency ultra low freezer. And that's courtesy of UGA Utility and Energy Management and UGA Green Labs. So we're moving into the 3rd year of the challenge. Last year, we had 47 labs participate for a combined energy savings of almost 170,000 kilowatt hours a year. So that was equivalent to taking 28 gas-powered cars off the road or powering 15 American homes for a year. And last year, we saw the most participation from the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. And we saw the highest energy savings in the Department of Genetics. So this past year, Dr. Jay Shri Samanta was our winner. And the year before, Dr. John Wares, who's pictured here with his new freezer, won. So these savings also are cumulative and they persist into the future. So when you take these actions, you're really making a big change moving forward. All right, number 5 on the actions you can take over the next week. Review your lab's nitrile glove use. Now, the US is the world leader in nitrile glove use, followed by the UK and Europe. About 268 billion nitrile gloves are used annually, and Malaysia is hands down the world leader in nitrile glove manufacturing and supplies more than 70% of total global demand. They also supply more than 2/3 of the nitrile gloves used in the United States. Now, pre-pandemic, nitrile gloves cost around 14 cents per pair. Post-pandemic, we're paying about 28 cents per pair. That does not even begin to reflect the true cost of nitrile gloves. Now, there's many aspects of the nitrile glove life cycle which requires our attention, from the raw materials used, the fuel and manufacturing, the labor, the disposal. For today's example, I just want to focus on the labor that goes into them. Right now, more than 30,000 migrant workers from Myanmar, Indonesia, and Vietnam work in Malaysia's glove industry. They paid up to 5,000 US dollars for the opportunity to work in a glove factory with a promise of sending money back home to their families. What happens is that these workers are trapped in debt bondage, and it takes years to work off that initial debt. They're forced to live on site. Their passports are confiscated. They work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. They get 1 day off a month. They don't have access to nutritional food or healthcare. And this problem is so pervasive that it's been recognized even by the US government. So this is the number 1 consumable used in both science and medicine. And it is also the number 1 consumable used in UGA research labs. So we want you to use your critical PPE when you need it, but instill this idea that there may be opportunities to reevaluate their use. So when I was in the lab, I would put on a fresh pair of gloves when it wasn't scientifically necessary. When I was doing the final DI rinse on dishes, or if I was removing an autoclaved red bag from the autoclave and taking it to the dumpster. So there were moments that I used them that weren't scientifically necessary. And those are the moments we want you to clue into. You also may be able to use reusable rubber gloves for some processes. Again, use your critical PPE when needed, use it when its sterility is required, but just be mindful that this supply chain is terribly rife with human rights violations. And UGA Green Labs is working on a safe list to provide you with information on how to purchase fair labor nitrile gloves. But until then, one thing you can do is consider purchasing US manufactured gloves. Now I want to share with you 3 actions you can take over the next 2 months to make your labs more sustainable. Number 1, embrace sustainable laboratory procurement. So obviously the gloves is a great place to start there, but also you can review commonly used consumables in your labs. So if you purchase pipette tip boxes that are already stocked, like this first top left image, see if you can, if it's able to be integrated into your research to buy refill stacks instead. Now those refill inserts come with 1 box, and so just think that's, six boxes that you're avoiding using by doing that. Also explore more sustainable options in whatever consumables you use the most. So maybe just take a quick look around and see. And if you are not sure how to do that, reach out to us. We're happy to advise you. And then also, we hope you'll give preference to companies that are exhibiting greater extended producer responsibility, whether that's through take back programs or more responsible packaging. That's really important that we not only prioritize that, but also give our business to companies that are doing the right thing as well. And finally, I want to share with you this document that we helped create in partnership with the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council for sustainable procurement of lab supplies. All right, number 2 on the 3 actions you can take over the next 2 months. Add timers to your benchtop equipment. Now, the average campus water bath stays on 24/7, 365 because we need it when we need it. And if you're running PCR or doing other similar research, you can't always predict that exact moment. And so we leave them on all the time so they serve our research. Now, UGA Green Labs, we actually provide timers, and we'll come in for consulting labs. We'll come in, we will ask you, when is the final hour that someone will be working in your lab? So if that's 9 o'clock at night, we'll set it to power down at 9. And then we'll say, when's the earliest lab member arrive? And we'll set it to power up an hour before they come in. So just by cutting out those overnight hours, we're saving about $400 worth of energy a year per unit. And we have several thousand water baths on campus. So this really adds up when you think about just the volume of our campus research enterprise. Again, we're never going to ask you to sacrifice the convenience you need for your research. Rather, we just want to help you tune into ways to make your operations more efficient. And the third action you can take over the next 2 months is join lab recycling efforts. So currently we offer lab recycling for number 2 and number 5 small lab plastics, for EPS film, that's styrofoam coolers, plastic film, and cardboard. If you want to participate in the plastics recycling, you need to onboard with us, and we'll tell you everything you need to know about it. But just so everyone's on the same page, we never have any chemical containers at all in the recycling. Even if you know it's benign or non-hazardous, it's an agreement we have with Athens Clarke County. And we can have no lab materials in UGA's single stream recycling. Again, this is an agreement we have with Athens Clarke County, and if they see lab materials in the single stream, unfortunately, that whole lot is at risk for being landfilled. So we want to be really diligent about this. All lab recycling on campus is done through special source recycling. So if you go to our website you will see a lot of information about our laboratory waste streams. This information used to be housed on 5 different UGA websites, but now it's kind of one-stop shopping. You can see what the waste stream is, which campus stakeholder owns that policy and manages that waste, and how to get in touch with them. So 2 actions you can take over the next year. Number 1, and this is perhaps the most important for your own benefit for your research, and that is begin to define your lab's baseline for tracking sustainability improvements. There is a massive global movement underway to connect research funding with sustainable science efforts. So the 4 major UK bodies are now requiring sustainable science adoption in order to receive federal granting dollars. And the US is making movement in the same direction. US Department of Health and Human Services and the Climate Action Plan Priority Number 3, which was developing climate resilient grant policies. Part of what UGA Green Labs has been contributing to is this Better Grants website that you can look at. And that's an acronym for Bringing Efficiency to Research. And you can look at this website, you can see suggested language for insertion into grant applications, such as the broader impact section on NSF grants. You can also learn more about the 2 Code of Federal Regulations, which actually require efficiency in our research. And the sustainable science movement is underway and it is moving fast, y'all. So position yourself to maximize these opportunities. And then finally, become a UGA certified Green Lab. Now, this certification program is currently under development. And we waited for this internal certification to benefit our researchers beyond UGA because we want to be part of a global standard. There's a global standard that is expected in fall of 2026. And we hope that our program will just easily integrate with that to give you an advantage beyond the 4 walls of UGA and on a global platform. Now, my dream is really to have UGA be the first R1 research institution with a campus-wide sustainable science commitment. And we really hope you'll join us in this effort. UGA, we're champions in so many ways, and we have an opportunity to champion sustainable science as well. So I'll pause there. I'll share these 3 final resources with you, our website, the I2SL website, and the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council website. And again, I wanted to thank Dean Hunter for joining us today. And I hope that hope you have some questions. We're excited to share with you.
Thanks, Star. Do we have any questions for our speakers today? I think we've got one coming in. So let me see. What is the least sustainable thing I'm doing in my lab? And is there anything that we can do about that? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll respond to that. I would say storing your samples at a colder temperature than is scientifically necessary. And, many of our samples that we have stored at -80, even, DNA we know is secure at -20, which is really mind-blowing. But so much of that is that, the standard used to be -68 if you've been in research a while. And when the refrigeration industry started making colder coolers, colder freezers, we went on with our seed money and we thought, wow, if -68 is good, -80 must be so much better. But in reality, it's really not necessary.
Thanks, Star. Any other questions for our speakers today? Oh, I've got a raised hand. Hold on. Megan, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you guys so much for the presentation. It's super informative. My question is piggybacking off of that question, in that what are there known scenarios when -80 is necessary? Because you say most. Is there any particular situation where that is necessary? Because I imagine trying to tell my boss, like, hey, let's turn our freezer down to -70, and just the panic and the refusal.
Yeah.
Even though I would love to, I would love to know the situations where it is necessary, and then come with that data where it's like, no, there's only, these certain scenarios where it's absolutely necessary.
Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, so you make an incredible point, which is we never want any of these actions to be risky. We never want that to be anything that undermines anyone's confidence or makes them nervous. So it's really important to have data driving these decisions. Now, there is some uncertainty about the storage temperature for serum. And that is really the main thing that we see in those debates. But for anyone that is wanting to make these changes and not sure where it falls scientifically, we're happy to direct you to a database that has thousands of samples and that can give you confidence in basically your peers and how they've been storing their samples and the viability of those samples. We also do have, there are not a lot of peer-reviewed published journal publications about this, but there are some that are really critical and very strong. And so we're happy to share those too. And we always want these changes to be something that works for your research. And if that's not something, Megan, that works for your research, there are so many other things on the list that you can choose from. So really this is about looking and seeing, where do I want to start in my lab? What feels comfortable, what feels safe to me, and starting with those actions. And then in the meantime, we can get you this data, we can let you see data, and then you can make a data-driven decision. Thank you for your question.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Any other questions for our speakers today before we let them go? Going once, going twice. All right, well, let me thank both of our presenters and to our audience for being with us today. We hope you appreciate you. We appreciate you sharing your time with us today. So next week, we're going to hold an edition of Research Live that was originally supposed to happen in December, but we had to reschedule on Thursday, January 30th at the same time of 2:30 p.m. Nicholas Allen, director of the Wilson Center for Humanities and Arts, along with his colleagues Elizabeth Wright and Mark Callahan, will talk about humanities and arts as competitive difference. We hope to see you then, especially those folks who registered in December and had to wait. Your wait is almost over. So on behalf of the Office of Research, let me thank Star Scott and Dean Hunter for being with us today. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you at a Research Live soon. Thanks again. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.